Reading slumps can happen anywhere at any time. A reading slump is defined as a time when you just don't feel like reading, and I'm going to give you some tips and tricks of how to get out of a reading slump. The first tip to get out of a reading slump is to read a book that you really enjoyed. For me, that'd be reading a book like The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky, or Change of Heart by Jodi Picoult. Rereading a book that you really love can help because it will show you what you're looking for in a new book and what kind of books you can look for to read to try to get out of your reading slump. Maybe you need to read more contemporaries, maybe you need to read more science fiction books, and you can find what you really enjoy by rereading an old book that you love. Tip number 2 is listen to an audiobook. Sometimes you're in a reading slump because you just don't like sitting down and reading a book and you feel like you're wasting time. So a really good trick is to read an audiobook or listen to an audiobook rather, and it's really helpful because you can. Tip number 2 is listen to an audiobook. Sometimes you're in a reading slump because you just don't like sitting down and reading a book and you feel like you're wasting time. So a really good trick is to read an audiobook or listen to an audiobook rather, and it's really helpful because you can color while you're listening to an audiobook, you can do chores while you're listening to audiobooks, and something that you don't have to just sit and listen to, you can be doing something while you're listening to it.
Up against the pillows and flicking through the travel brochures that were beside his bed. She is wearing one of his t-shirts, and her long hair is tousled in a way that prompts reflexive thoughts of the previous night. He stands there, enjoying the brief flashback.
Tip number 3 is to read a book you've been dying to read. Maybe that means it's not a book that's on your current shelves right now. Maybe it means you have to go shopping for a new book, but find a book that you've really been dying to read and read it. I've always wanted to read Panic by Lauren Oliver, and I recently saw it at a bookstore, and I decided to get it in case I ever have a reading slump. Tip number 4 is just take a break from reading. Maybe you need to go online, watch Netflix, watch YouTube, or just, sit around, go hang out with friends. Just don't force yourself to read if you don't feel like you want to. Tip number 6 is to read short books. Sometimes you might be reading books that are too long and you feel like you're not accomplishing as much, so read a bunch of short books and that'll help you feel like you're reading, and it might help you get into reading those larger books. I like to read shorter books that are less than 200 pages so I can read more books in a shorter amount of time. And tip number 7 is to try a new genre. For me, I always read contemporary books, so sometimes that might mean that I need to read a science fiction book or a fantasy book, something different so that I can kind of open my mind to a new genre, and maybe I'll find that I really love that genre. Typically, I read contemporary books like The Sky is Everywhere, but maybe if I'm ever in a reading slump, I need to read a book like Deluxe, which is a science fiction book. Those are all my tips and tricks of how to get out of reading slump. I hope you learned a few tricks if you are ever in a reading slump.